Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is JAE LEE Day. We're taking a look at the last issue of the HELLSHOCK miniseries, issue number 4, cover dated November 1994. This is, I feel, going to be a pretty short review, guys, because I'm just going to be repeating a lot of the same stuff I repeated for issues 1 to 3. Not a lot going on in those issues, not a lot going on in this issue here. If you remember, issue number 1 was only like 14 pages, right? It was very short, and I feel like if JAE LEE had just made the HELLSHOCK miniseries 22-page or maybe 32-page issue one shot, you know, the story would have been a lot more succinct and condensed, and was probably the right amount for that amount of pages. As it stands with a 4-issue miniseries, he's really spreading it thin all the way throughout. Quite again, a boring story because just not that much happens. I will say this for the cover of issue number 4, he's finally done some, you know, a little more standard comic book art cover stuff. So you know, featuring the character that the book is about, because again, he's not even a well, you know, known character at this point, so you'd want a recognizable shot of him on the cover. And this is really the first one we get throughout the whole miniseries. The first one had a headshot, but that was a photo that was manipulated a little bit in Photoshop. This here actually is some comic book art. Pen and ink, lots of splatter and white medium, a staple of JAE LEE, but I do feel like on this cover and within this comic as well, he's leaning in a little bit more into the Bill Sienkiewicz vibe when it comes to his inking and moving away from the Simon Bisley stuff. At this point, most of the Simon Bisley stuff has kind of disappeared. So let's start so we can finish this one fairly quickly. So this is probably my favorite page in the whole book, in the whole issue, just because you've got a bit of storytelling going on, you've got a few different characters, you've got some backgrounds, right? And it feels like a fairly complete page, whereas as we go through, just like issues 1 and 2 and 3, you're going to see the lack of backgrounds and the lack of detail and just a lot of effect in the art, more so than actual storytelling. So this is probably the most storytelling that happens in this whole book. And the best looking page. I like the characters, the toned down anatomy. You know, I've talked about how I feel like he's slowly moving into that style that he's going to adopt for Inhumans and future stuff in his more modern style, with slightly less exaggerated proportions. The folds, I like how he does the folds on the character's costume, clothing rather. But yeah, other than that, once we move into the HELLSHOCK stuff, and this whole thing, you know, is basically, I'll spill the beans on this storyline. You know, this character who resembles him exactly is basically trying to convince him to kill his father, who is the reason for his sorrow, because as it's explained here, his father beats him, right? And, you know, this could have been done in so fewer pages, you know, and to get from point A to point B in the storyline took 4 issues, way too long. Again, I've got nothing to say about how evocative the art is. This is a great shot here. Again, we're getting all the JAE LEE-isms with the splatter and the white medium. So next, we just, you know, have a lot of pages just for verbal and physical confrontation between HELLSHOCK and his father, the fallen angel, right, who fell to hell after he mated with the human here, who is HELLSHOCK's mother, right? So again, you know, a lot of this could probably not be spread out on so many pages, but the rest of the issue is basically just that, a lot of macho posturing between HELLSHOCK and his father, and some great art, figure work at least. You know, I've talked about how a lot of times I feel like, you know, JAE LEE uses, and it makes sense, a much more kind of delicate aesthetic on the ladies, and then a harsher kind of line work on the male figures. And here, like I said, not characteristically JAE LEE in this shot here. There's something a little bit different about it there. And throughout this page, where I feel like, again, he's leaning really into the Sienkiewicz art style a lot, with the splattery inking and you know, very dirty kind of inking, white medium as well. Not quite sure what he's using here, if that's like a screen tone or some sort of Photoshop texture. It looks a little weird. I don't know if it works that well. Unfortunate sound effect here where he punches the angel's hand, right? Fap. I'm sure all of you out there know what that means. And yeah, just you know, a lot of reverting back and forth between the confrontation with HELLSHOCK and his father, and the kid here who's being taunted by what I assume is a demon who's taken his face and is trying to convince him to kill his father. So again, other than talking about the art at this point, that's basically what's happening. And eventually HELLSHOCK will get the better of his father, the angel, and save his mother, although it's not quite as obvious as I made it out to be in the actual pages in the sequential artwork when we get to the end. Cool shot here. Lots, you know, it was nice to see a little bit of violence there, a little bit of gore coming out of HELLSHOCK and some blood there. It's the kind of book with that style of inking that I would expect a bit more, so I felt kind of disappointed again because there's so little action and room for that throughout the beginning of the miniseries at least, and he kind of just does a little bit of it here in issue 4. Like this shot here, the full silhouette with the blood down here, the white medium. I think that's, you know, looks cool, very graphic, works really well, obviously with JAE Lee style. I thought this was kind of, you know, maybe the most interesting kind of fun moment of the whole miniseries, where HELLSHOCK actually reaches into his father's wounds on his back where his wings used to be, right? I guess before he fell to hell, and basically pulls his hand out and realizes he's just covered in maggots. And his father explained that that's basically what's been happening in hell, that the only reason he could have maggots there is because they fed on the love he had for his mother, which is an odd kind of thing to say, I guess. So our kid actually picks up the gun but will not follow through. So really this book and this whole miniseries is just full of striking images, right? So if you're there purely for the art, there's definitely some good stuff. Storyline, though, does not carry at all throughout the whole miniseries. Just kind of boring, and very few things happen. Great kind of Sienkiewicz shot once again here. Lots of dirty inking, white medium. And of course, you know, all of a sudden HELLSHOCK just from nowhere picks up a rock. So we don't even know where we are here. So where would he get that rock, right? There's no background established or anything. Close up of a gun here that feels kind of photocopied, blown up and statted. So that's kind of an odd choice for something so simple that you could probably drop really quick. And here we go, HELLSHOCK smashing his angel father's head in with the rock. And the kid here basically deciding that he can't shoot his father. This I thought was interesting. And I was like, ooh, Adam Kubert, inks by JAE Lee. Okay, that might be interesting. And then was sorely disappointed by what I saw, to be honest. And I'm even wondering if maybe the image was compressed a bit. It feels like it's stretched out this way, which you never want to do to artwork, ever, ever, ever. You never want to change the proportions horizontally or vertically, right? I don't know if that's what happened here, but it certainly looks like it. All right, so we get a boring monologue from HELLSHOCK's mother. You know, Jonakund showing up again and explaining that obviously just a rock to the head is not what's going to get rid of him here. And then the kid confronted by the demon. Kid actually ends up shooting the demon as they're struggling here, runs away. And yeah, that's basically it. I've talked before about, you know, the coloring that I don't think is great. The early 90s kind of computer coloring stuff that doesn't work. All of a sudden here, I feel like the aesthetic changes just on these panels down here. I don't know if it's the printing or what it is, or a different tool he's using for inking, but it just stands out a little bit as being somewhat different and not quite jiving with the rest of the artwork. So I don't know what it is, if he took a photo reference for this face or something, but yeah, just very inconsistent art-wise and story-wise. Another great gore shot of him, kind of his body just, as it says here, by consuming him from within. I don't know if that's exactly what it evokes, but apparently that's what's supposed to be happening, and his face just changes drastically all of a sudden, so not a lot of consistency. Off he goes. We get some crazy kind of photocopy effects and stretching effects on HELLSHOCK's face here. And then, boom, he and his mother embracing at the end. So, you know, I can't take back the time it took to read this miniseries. Not that it was that long, but, you know, at least there was some interesting artwork to look at. But all very kind of one note and, you know, really leaning into that gothic vibe. And maybe, you know, should have spent a little more time actually developing the story, or as I've mentioned earlier on, just streamlining it. And this easily could have been just like a one-shot special. We get an epilogue, which again doesn't really serve any real purpose, and just bring back, you know, the idea that the demon is still watching over this kid. I've got the second Hellboy miniseries. I'll be looking at that next. So hopefully JAE Lee's found a more interesting way to get across the ideas and the concepts that he wants, as opposed to this first miniseries, which I can understand why this one is constantly found in the dollar bins, right? Well, there you go, guys. That is my short and sweet review of HELLSHOCK issue number 4. If you're subscribed and you are still watching, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your support. If you are watching but are not subscribed, please hit like or subscribe below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, helps us grow, and helps get us out there to other people out there who are into comic books just like we are. So thanks again, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like! Subscribe! Like! Subscribe!
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.